welcome back. In this video we'll be reading another chapter of Christopher Robin by Disney. Chapter 14. Inside the efficiency department of Winslow Luggage, meanwhile, Christopher Robin was in desperate need of saving. He had arrived in the lobby of the building with only minutes to spare, disheveled and feeling completely unprepared. Racing to catch the elevator just as the doors began to slide shut, he found himself alone with Giles Winslow. The man's face had a healthy glow, and he was holding a golf bag. Seeing Christopher, he shifted awkwardly on his feet. "Ready for the presentation, Robin?" he asked. Christopher tapped the briefcase. "It's all in here," he said, nodding. Then his eyes narrowed at the clubs. "Have you been golfing?" "Me? What? No," Giles stammered. He pointed at the bag. "These are an area we're branching into. Golf bags. Been testing them this weekend." The elevator arrived at their floor, and as the door slid open, Giles slithered out. "Right. Well, see you on the dance floor. We're all counting on you." Then before Christopher could blink, Giles slipped down the hallway and into his office. Christopher watched him go, trying to tamp down the anger he felt boiling up inside him. Golf bags? Right. That was a whole lot of hogwash, and they both knew it. While he wanted to storm into Giles' office and give him a piece of his mind, he didn't have the time. Looking over at the clock on the wall, he realized he didn't have any time, period. He needed to get to the conference room now. The meeting was scheduled to start in less than a minute. Racing down the hall, Christopher flung open the conference room doors and took one of the few remaining seats. The others were occupied by members of the board, who had gathered to hear how the company was going to cut 20% of its operating costs. A moment later, the door swung open and Giles entered. He glanced around the table, but upon seeing that the only open seat was by Christopher, he visibly cringed. Walking over, he sat down just as his father entered the room. Everyone else stood. "As you were," the older Winslow said, gesturing for everyone to sit. When everyone was once again seated, Giles began to speak. "Right, well, we all know why we're here. No one wants to see the Winslow luggage ship sink." There were murmurs of agreement from around the room. "So hard decisions must be made. Now, Robbie and I worked tirelessly the whole weekend on this." He coughed awkwardly as Christopher glared at him. He went on, "But I don't want to take all the credit. I'll let Christopher present our solutions." Getting to his feet, Christopher slowly headed toward the front of the table. He clutched his briefcase as though it could offer comfort. As he passed by the conference room doors, he saw his team gathered outside. They all wore identical looks of anticipation and fear. He nodded at them, hoping to silently reassure them. Then he turned back to the room. "Right," he began. "The good news is I've found some cuts. There's a chance the company can be saved." The board members all nodded their heads approvingly. "But it won't be easy. We need to cut overheads, find cheaper supplies, and there are a lot of sacrifices to be made in terms of our workforce." Outside the conference room, Macmillan, Hastings, and the others exchanged nervous glances. Sacrifices to the workforce did not sound promising. While they knew Christopher had their backs, they were efficiency experts. They also knew that he was going to have to do what he was going to have to do. Turning back to the conference room, they continued to listen in. "Sacrifices are fine," Giles said. "Now show us the proposals." Christopher bit his tongue. Sacrifices were not fine, but he had no choice. Giles was the boss. "It's all laid out here in my papers," he said, lifting his briefcase and placing it on the large conference table. "They are very detailed, so hold tight." His voice trailed off as the lid to the briefcase popped open, revealing nothing. His big folder was gone. In its place was a collection of objects from the 100-acre wood: poo sticks, acorns, a jar of honey. As Christopher frantically rustled through them, looking for the papers, he also found a weather vane and Eeyore's tail. His mouth dropped open and his throat went dry. He stopped searching and just stared down at the briefcase. Outside the conference room, Christopher's team watched their leader's face go pale. "He's frozen," Butterworth observed. "Like a rabbit in the headlights," Ledbetter added. Galsworthy was always ready to see the negative. Letta groaned. "We're all doomed." They lowered his head into his hands, unwilling to watch what was going to happen next. Back in the conference room, it wasn't pretty. Giles was staring at Christopher, arms crossed and eyes narrowed. The board members were staring at Christopher, arms crossed and eyes narrowed. And worse still, the older Winslow was staring at Christopher, arms crossed and eyes narrowed. "Robin," Mr. Winslow finally said, "if we don't solve this issue, we'll have no choice but to shut down. What have you got?" Christopher looked up. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't show him and everyone else the collection of objects. His mind had gone completely blank. He couldn't remember a single number he had written. He couldn't recall one of the solutions he had come up with. All he could see was acorns. The clock was on the wall was tick, tick, tick. The seconds felt like hours. Just when Christopher thought he was going to have a breakdown, his assistant burst into the conference room. Racing over, she whispered something in his ear and then pointed to the door. Evelyn stood there, her face as pale as Christopher's. "Gentlemen," Christopher said, looking back at the table, "I have to step out for a moment. My apologies." "What the devil are you doing?" Giles said, pushing back from the table angrily. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." Christopher didn't even offer a response. Instead, he raced out to find out exactly what was going on. Because if Evelyn was here, and not out in the country, it couldn't be anything good. Christopher had been right. It wasn't anything good. Evelyn quickly filled him in. Somehow, after he had left the country house, Madeline had slipped away. Evelyn managed to track her down to the train station, and after speaking to the ticket seller, figured out that she had gotten a train ticket to London. Unfortunately, Evelyn told Christopher she had missed the train Madeline was on, and had to race and get their car to make the drive into the city. "Where is she?" Christopher asked, scanning the sidewalks from the passenger side of the car as it rushed around London. "I don't know," Evelyn answered, her voice raw with emotion. "Somewhere between here and the station. She's all alone." Her voice cracked as she was overcome with guilt. This was all her fault. If she hadn't been so caught up in being mad at Christopher, she might have noticed that Madeline had slipped off. Shoving her hand into her pocket, she pulled out the note Madeline had left and handed it to her husband. Scanning it quickly, Christopher's eyes landed on the word exposition. His expression grew serious. "She's not alone," he said. "Who's she with?" Evelyn asked, taking her eyes off the road long enough to give her husband a curious look. She had been panicking ever since the moment she had found Madeline's note. Christopher, on the other hand, now seemed oddly calm. True, his face had grown a bit paler, and as she watched, he fidgeted in his seat. Evelyn knew that look and that motion. She had seen both many times over the course of their marriage. It meant Christopher had something to tell her, but wasn't sure just how to do it. She raised an eyebrow and waited for him to start talking, because that, she also knew, was always what happened next. Sure enough, Christopher began to talk. At first, Evelyn wished he hadn't, because initially it sounded like her husband had lost his mind. Apparently, as he told it, Christopher's childhood stuffed bear, Winnie the Pooh, had found him in London and brought him back, through a green door in a tree, to a place called the 100-Acre Wood, to help rescue the rest of his childhood friends. But as Christopher went on with his story, something happened. It was as though a light had been off inside of him, had suddenly switched back on. Her husband's eyes grew brighter, his voice grew lighter, and by the time Christopher began to tell her about his other friends, which, if she were to believe him, included Talking Piglet, Owl, Rabbit, Kangaroo, and her baby, and Tigger, whatever that was. Christopher's mouth, which Evelyn had been convinced was stuck in a perpetual frown, had started to lift at the corners, and she, to her shock, had started to go along with his story. "What's a Tigger?" she heard herself ask, when Christopher mentioned a creature she had never heard of before. "Tiggers?" Christopher said, growing more animated. He hadn't realized how much he wanted to tell Evelyn everything until he had started. Now he didn't want to stop. He failed, unfortunately, to comprehend her still outwarding disbelieving expression. So he went on. Well, they're wonderful things. Their tops are made out of rubber, their bottoms are made out of springs. The description complete, he continued his tale. Anyway, I pretended there was a heffalump, but there really wasn't a heffalump. Reality crashed over Evelyn. She had let Christopher tell his tale because it felt nice to have him share with her, and she had loved seeing his smile. But a heffalump? And an animal made out of rubber? She had to put a stop to this before it went too far. Are you hearing yourself, Evelyn? Evelyn asked, cut him off. You need to quit. Christopher shrugged. I think that decision's about to be made for me, he said. Then out of the corner of his eye he saw a flash of orange and black stripes disappear around a corner up ahead. Tigger, it had to be. There they are, left. While Evelyn wasn't entirely sure she should listen to anything her husband had to say, she turned left. A few cars ahead of them she saw a Winslow luggage truck rumbling along. She narrowed her eyes. It was dragging something, but she couldn't quite make out what. I'm telling you, it was Tigger, Christopher said, pointing toward the truck. It must have been with the others. Evelyn snapped her head toward Christopher. Darling, she said, trying to sound calm, though she was convinced she was going to have to commit her husband after they found Madeline. These creatures aren't real. Listen, I'll call Dr. Cunningham on Monday. I think with some rest and... Whump. The car shook as something hit the windshield. Whump, whump. Evelyn's head snapped back toward the windshield. Then her mouth fell open. There, squished up against the pane of the glass, were a donkey, a pig, and what could only be a Tigger. Hey, Christopher Robin, Tigger said, smiling at his friend. On the far side of the car, the now empty trunk, which Tigger had managed to free them from right before it broke loose from the truck, bounced a few feet before smashing into the curb. Tigger started to tell Christopher what he had done, but before he could, Piglet spoke. You must be Christopher Robin's wife, he said to Evelyn. How do you do? Evelyn's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, gasping for air. Then she looked over at Christopher. He hadn't been making up stories. He wasn't crazy. Somehow these animals were real. They were real, and they were the only link she had to her daughter. Pulling the car over, she and Christopher quickly bringing them inside the vehicle. Where's Madeline? Christopher asked as the three got settled in the seat. In a truck called Woozlewards, Piglet answered. Christopher and Evelyn exchanged a shared glance with one another. Then Evelyn put her foot to the pedal and pushed down hard. Wrenching the wheel, she steered the car back into traffic and once again headed toward the Winslow luggage building, right where they believed the truck they were now pursuing was headed. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. See you next time.